This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 59. Welcome to the 59th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. If you've been enjoying the show, I would love it if you'd take a moment and leave a review and a rating on iTunes. It would help the show to move up in rankings so that more people can find it. And of course, I'd like to say a special thank you to all the listeners who've left reviews already. I read all of your reviews, and I appreciate you taking the time to let me know how I'm doing. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please stop by the show notes page and leave a comment. You'll find all the episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S, and on Twitter at Fertile Friday. And if you'd like to learn more about the fertility awareness method, join the Fertility Friday community on Facebook. So just go to fertilityfriday.com/community and you'll be redirected to the group. And in today's show, I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Alexandra Jamieson. Alex has been a chef and an author and a functional nutrition coach for over a decade. She has written 4 books, most recently the #1 best-selling book, Women, Food, and Desire. She was featured in the movie Super Size Me, so you might remember her from that. And after being vegan for over 10 years, Alexandra came out as not being vegan anymore. And she has since created a community around the idea of following your cravings to discover what they actually have to teach you. She also has an awesome podcast, the Cravecast, where she delves into the importance of following your cravings and so much more. And in today's show, we'll be talking about Alexandra's transition from a vegan diet and how we can all learn to listen to and honor our cravings. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. So I did give you an introduction, and I'm sure many of the listeners know who you are. But for those who maybe aren't so familiar, or if any person didn't actually see Super Size Me and wasn't familiar with your work there, maybe you could just talk a little bit about yourself and even maybe how that movie came about.
Sure. So, I was really born into this world, this line of work, this food and health biz that we're in. My mom was an organic gardener and had an organic gardening radio show for 10 years when I was a kid. So I really grew up knowing where my food came from, the amount of work and love that goes into growing your own food. So, I was raised by hippies. So we didn't have a lot of over-the-counter meds in our house. We had a lot of herbs and, old dusty books that told you how to deal with health problems. But I also had an insane sugar addiction from a very, very young age. And now I know that I had candida yeast overgrowth from a very, very young age. And I did everything within my power to figure out how to get more sugar because it wasn't in the house. So I actually started going to Sunday school when I was 7 by myself at the church down the road. Like, my parents didn't go with me. I went by myself because I found out the kids got Kool-Aid and cookies.
Wow, that's wild.
I was literally going to church for the Kool-Aid. And all my high school, after school job money went to going to fast food, etc. So fast forward to the age of 25, and I got really sick. I had migraine headaches almost every day. I was 30 pounds heavier than I had been in college. I was exhausted and depressed, and I went to a doctor, and I said, look, I can't take these headaches anymore. And within a few minutes, I had prescriptions for painkillers and Prozac. And I was really, I knew my body, my soul said, no, do not take those. I have a family history of addiction and overdose with prescription drugs. And I was really afraid, this isn't going to help me. This is just going to mask the symptoms. This is a dangerous road to go down. So I went to another doctor, somebody my mom would have taken me to, right? He had Buddhas and ferns in his office, a little fountain. And he sat down with me for an hour and asked me what I was eating. Now, this was 1999. This was way, this was at the very, very beginning of this food revival that we're in. And he said, okay, we're going to change what you're eating, and here's some supplements. Take a probiotic. I was like, what are you talking about? And he gave me a list of foods to avoid. And I almost started crying because it was everything I was eating. No more fast food, no more sugar. And I said, I had the same feeling, sensation, message from my body, from my soul that said, listen to this guy. This is going to help you. So I went to the library. I got my hands on all the books that you could get at that time. And I was like, this is it. This is it. I read a book called Diet for a New America by John Robbins. It's a great book. He's a great man. And it introduced me to the idea of veganism. And I said, I'm going to take this doctor's ideas and I'm going to take it a step further because that's just the kind of girl I am. I'm going ovaries to the wall on this one. And I'm going full out vegan, no sugar, no refined foods. And it was hard. It was very challenging. There was no Whole Foods at that time and no Amazon with which to, overnight ship all the cool stuff you want. You had to go out and find it. And within a couple of weeks of doing this whole plant-based diet, I felt like a new woman. No more headaches. The weight, the exhaustion, the depression started lifting. The 30 pounds just started evaporating, and I wasn't counting calories or trying, I was just eating good food. And that's when I said, this is it. Everyone needs to know about this. This is my life's work. So I went back to culinary school. I got certified as a health coach. And right about that time is when I met Morgan. Now even though I was like in healthy cooking school and health coach school during the day, I was paying the bills by serving alcohol in a smoky bar at night. It's very yin and yang kind of lifestyle. Yeah. So, I met this cute guy at the bar. I picked him up. We went out. We started dating. And after about a year of being together and my obsession with healthy food and quinoa and kale just kept growing, we came up with this idea for Super Size Me together. He was a budding filmmaker. He'd had a little bit of success and he was looking for an idea to really dive into. And my food obsession and his film obsession came to be Super Size Me. And if you haven't seen the film, Morgan ate nothing but McDonald's for a month. He got incredibly sick. And I'm the vegan chef girlfriend who appears regularly in the film, rolling her eyes and being deathly afraid that her boyfriend's going to die. So the movie was a huge hit. It really showed the dangers of fast food. It premiered at Sundance. He won awards. We traveled the world to 25 countries in a year premiering the film, got nominated for an Oscar. And it really was the beginning of coalescing all of these disparate food movements around health and food and nutrition and obesity. It was like a lightning rod, right? Everyone could point to this one movie and say, yes, this. So that was the beginning of my career.
Well, and that movie was so powerful. I mean, I think it's almost one of those, like, where were you when, like you can remember when you saw this movie, and it was just so powerful and bizarre because of the things that he experienced. You wouldn't necessarily think he would become depressed and addicted to the food and all that kind of stuff. It was really profound. So I think it really made a lot of people question their dietary choices in a certain way because you just know it's not good for you, but you don't necessarily know what it's actually doing to your body.
Right. So I had made myself extremely sick over years of eating a fast food diet. And Morgan was able to show he went from extremely healthy, he got all the blood tests, had 3 doctors following his progress. He got extremely sick in less than a month. And if we could go back and do it again, it would be so great to have a woman and a man do it at the same time so that we could explore what happened with her hormones. Because what happened with Super Size Me is what happens with so much in modern medicine is that stuff gets tested on men and they try to directly translate it to women's bodies. And I know that you probably have some experience with that in your tribe here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, because I mean, what I deal with when it comes to fertility awareness is the fact that when you go to the doctor with any type of menstrual concerns, so when you mentioned that you went to the doctor, you were having headaches and basically you were given a prescription for Prozac. Is that that was the drug that they...
Yep. Prozac and painkillers.
Yep. So it's kind of the similar thing when you have an issue with your menstrual cycle and they just say, my periods are really heavy and they hurt. It's always just, okay, a prescription for the pill or a prescription for painkillers. And they're not really even trying to figure out what is going on with your hormones, how the woman's body is different to the male's body. So I think that would be a super interesting movie, but I don't know if anyone would sign up to be the guinea pig on that one.
No, I really don't want anyone to do it. I didn't even want Morgan to do it, but thank goodness it made for a great film and he got well again afterwards. Basically, I put him on my diet, the whole, plant-based diet, unrefined foods, and after a couple months, his liver function, his kidneys, his blood pressure, everything came back to normal, which then became my first book, The Great American Detox Diet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so how long were you actually a vegan? I have a few questions about, what your diet looked like and also kind of, like how you felt throughout those years and what that was like.
So I was vegan for over a decade, about 11-ish years. And, what I now realize is that the diet that heals you isn't always the diet that will sustain you.
Hmm.
That the cleansing, the high amounts of phytonutrients, that diet was absolutely appropriate for where I was, my life stage, my current health condition. But fast forward 10 years, I had a child. I breastfed for 2 years. And towards the end of my veganism, not only was I, a mom and my partner was now on the road all the time. As his career took off, he was gone all the time. It became very stressful and our marriage started to fail. So the stress of being a single parent, divorcing, my body couldn't handle the stress. I was severely, severely anemic. Oh my gosh. My hormones started to go crazy. I was having my menstrual cycle every 14, 16 days. And on top of my already existing anemia. And I tried everything within the vegan framework to fix what was going on. I was craving meat like crazy. It'd been 10 years since I had eaten any, but every time I went out and I smelled it or saw it, my mouth started watering. And the superfoods, the sea vegetables, the iron supplements, nothing was working. So that's when I realized, I teach other people to learn how to listen to their bodies. I give them the permission to do what's best for them and take away the judgment and shame, but I wasn't allowing myself to do the same. And I think that's what's so hard for all women. No matter what your diet is, no matter what your goals are, is that we are so trained, we're so good at trying to do what's right. A lot of us have, well, I certainly have good girl syndrome. I want to be good. I want to be right. I want to do things and be nice.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get us into trouble because we stop listening to our own needs, our own bodies. And instead, we put other people's moral frameworks above our own needs. And that's where I was getting into trouble.
Well, and I think that good girl syndrome lends itself to this idea of perfection in the sense of I'm going to find the perfect diet and it's going to serve me forever. Because we're all searching for something, and I think that idea that there's one way to eat for everybody and this is going to be the way to eat throughout my entire life without fail. I think that is, and part of it is, for me, I mean, I was absolutely never a hardcore vegan, but I actually tried veganism for a little while. I probably lasted for somewhere between 6 months to a year. And it was because, like I watched a bunch of documentaries, I did a bunch of research, and I thought, oh my goodness, right? Like the animals are treated so terribly, and I don't want to be a part of that. Who wants to be part of that? It's horrible. And I also thought, like, oh my goodness, all these people who have cancer are having a vegan diet, and they're,
Right.
helping themselves reduce their symptoms, and in some cases, they actually, get better and all that kind of stuff. So it was really like, oh my goodness. But then similarly to you, I was also around that time when I had just had a baby breastfeeding, and you don't really think about how much that taxes your body. I mean, you're making a human being
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, like, so maybe you could talk a little bit about what that was like after being vegan for so long, and not just like being a vegan like in your house and cooking and no one knows it. I mean, being a
Mm-hmm.
vegan on like a huge scale where people know it, where you've written a book about it, and having to kind of question that framework that has been a huge part of your life for so long. What was that like?
Oh man, it was rough. I joke and say I was professionally vegan. I wrote the first book after Super Size Me, and then I wrote two dummies books, Living Vegan for Dummies, and then Vegan Cooking for Dummies. So this is an international brand. Those yellow and black books. So I had now written three books about vegan cooking and nutrition. I've coached thousands of people over the years, and I have never once said you need to go vegan, right? Like I really always respected the individual. I said this is what works for me, so it's something to try. But a lot of people looked up to me, and I was in this movie and I'd written these books, and it was my brand. It was my personal brand that I was the vegan health coach. And to now go through this massive change in my own life, my own body, where I really knew I needed to eat something different. So, oh my gosh, I remember the first time I sat down and I ate some salmon. Oh, my body was like, thank you. More of that, please. And it felt physically so good, but emotionally, I was tied up in knots. And I struggled for over a year, almost 2 years, like secretly eating animal protein at home with the curtains drawn, not eating it in public and being afraid. And I finally told a couple of people I knew, and these were friends who I knew they loved me, and they were gonna, they're gonna love me no matter what I eat. But I did broach the subject with a couple of friends of mine who were also kind of well known in that world, and they said, "Well, what about your brand?" And I was like, "What about my body?" I was like, I feel terrible. This is not working. And I realized, like, I cannot live I'm in danger here. I can't live like this anymore. And I know when I finally came out as no longer vegan on my website, and, it went totally viral, thousands of comments, thousands of shares, hundreds of emails to my personal email. And there were a few people, big names in the health and wellness and vegan community who reached out to me personally via email. And they were like, "Hey, we're so sorry you're going through this. I love you. I hope you're okay." But there was very little public support. People were personally supportive, but they weren't coming out publicly. And it got a lot of attention because of this vicious backlash. Now, I want to frame all this and say, I have lots of friends who are vegan. I still eat a lot of vegan food. I think it's a great diet to explore. I know there are a few people in the community who are very extreme and honestly a bit violent. For this compassionate community, there's some people who are very extreme in their views and in their actions. Mm-hmm. And I know that I'm not painting the entire vegan community with the same brush, but it makes it really hard for us to listen to ourselves and to evolve as people, because our bodies change, ladies, as we grow older. They do. It's just going to happen. And you need to be able to honor and listen to and adjust and evolve as time goes on. And when you define yourself by a certain way of eating, it's very hard to evolve in a way that will support you. So I tell people now, look, I will never define how I eat ever again. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you, because it's almost like you inadvertently painted yourself into a corner. And then when you needed to make a shift for yourself, it became this huge public issue, when really it was a personal decision that you were making for your own health.
Right.
One of the things that I have found interesting is, I haven't been blogging as much this year because I've been focused so much on the podcast, but I've written several, articles. And one of the articles that gets the most comments and the most hits is this article that I wrote about, why maybe if you're trying to have a baby, maybe you should consider a few things about a vegan diet. So I think it's called 6 Ways That a Vegan Diet may harm your fertility. And in the article, I'm not trying to say that no one should be vegan. I'm more kind of sharing my own experience and kind of saying that there's a few things that you may want to just consider, kind of thing, if you happen to be having trouble. Because I mean, there are some people that do amazing on a vegan diet for years and they have no problems. And then there are people who like really don't thrive. And so there's a lot of kind of bio individuality out there, you know, when it comes to like how well your body can synthesize nutrients and those types of things, right? And it's so amazing the comments that I get, which are so like extreme and just like you're being anti-vegan and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's really interesting because, like you said, it's an ideology that you are maybe following and you may actually be sick. There are people out there who may actually be having symptoms that aren't good.
Yeah.
And refusing to consider that maybe part of this is what I'm eating or what I'm not eating.
Absolutely. It's so true. And I counseled a couple of women who were having they were having all kinds of issues. I mean, hypothyroid, they were having fertility issues, and I told them, I said, I know that you are dedicated to this lifestyle, to this choice to be vegan, but you've tried everything else. And I think you should honor the fact that you are also an animal and you would not deny food to another animal that it needed to thrive and survive. So maybe it's time to consider adding animal protein back to your diet as an experiment. And it was met with, utter anger and silence.
Yeah.
It's challenging because it has become a moral stance.
Yeah.
When meat is murder, when you define eating meat as you are now a murderer, then you can't consider eating animal protein, eating meat again, even if it might save you.
Well, I'd love for you to talk. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I mean, it's that whole thing you said about compassion, because being that, my whole podcast is fertility focus, is Fertility Friday. So it's all about fertility. And there's so much to learn about what your body needs to make hormones and what you need to make a baby and what could be impacting your fertility. And especially for women who are charting their menstrual cycles, it becomes very apparent very quickly if there's some sort of hormonal imbalance, because of course it's like anything that you're monitoring. As soon as you start monitoring something, then you really see, but with your menstrual cycle, it's very obvious. So for anyone who starts charting their menstrual cycles, or they go out and buy Tony Weschler's book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, it'll say your menstrual cycle on average should be about 28 days. And this is what it should look like. And so you should have this many days of a period. And then you should have this many days of dry. And then you should have this many days of cervical mucus. And then you should ovulate. And then you should have this many days of dry. So for women who are actually vegan and who are kind of monitoring their menstrual cycles and their menstrual cycles are wonky, and it's a thing within kind of the fertility awareness educators where if you always have to check on diet, that's always part of it. So if you're working with someone and they're looking at your chart and it's all over the place and you can see that there's a hormonal imbalance, and you're working with a client who's vegan, it's kind of like a thing where it just doesn't work for everybody. So, I mean, what you had mentioned that your menstrual cycle had started to kind of change.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, like what it was kind of towards the beginning and then how that changed for you throughout the process.
I was one of the lucky few. It seems like there's fewer and fewer women who I was able to get pregnant right away. I actually didn't have any menstrual problems for the entire 10 years that I was vegan up until the very end. And I really believe that it was a combination of the huge amounts of stress going on in my life, you cannot discount stress and insomnia, and its effect on your hormones and your blood sugar levels and the severe anemia. So I had this kind of perfect storm of things going on. And I'm sure you talk about this, but if someone's not sleeping, it almost doesn't matter what they eat.
Yeah, it's true.
You almost can't fix anything unless you got to get sleep under control. You got to manage that. So my sleep was totally disrupted. My it was, again, very anemic, and I was having a devil of a time getting my numbers up, and I just couldn't do it. And if you don't have enough iron in your body, it's remarkable. I was like, how am I bleeding more often? And I don't have enough red blood cells in my body. Like, how is my iron so low and I'm bleeding more? Like, I totally didn't understand it. But it's like, there's like this magic. We don't understand how all the pieces fit together. We still don't know the symphony of the complexity of your gut bacteria and your hormones and stress and how all these things work together. So you have to learn to listen to and trust your body and what she's telling you, because your body is giving you information about what you need. And it may be meat, it may be sleep, it may be pleasure, it may be ending a relationship. Like, there may be a lot of things that your body is asking for that are going to lead to the state of health that you really desire. But we're not so practiced at listening and then following and trusting what our body is telling us. So, yeah.
Well, and how would you address it now, given that, you quote unquote, you came out? It's so interesting how that's such a thing, right? But after you came out and after you did kind of experience what it was like to shift and how you felt, what would you say to a woman who is kind of struggling? There's a lot of women and men who are doing great, but if a woman's listening and she's kind of struggling with that, her health is not really where it needs to be, and maybe she is trying to get pregnant, she's having trouble. And especially what you said about that feeling of like, meat is murder. How do you even broach and support somebody who is in that space?
Well, I have to start with, I feel you. I know how complicated and torturous that place can be. And you're not alone. This is happening to so many younger and younger women, especially, where we're following advice and we're trying to stick with a diet that maybe worked for us for a long time, and it's not working anymore. And that doesn't make you a bad person, right? It actually makes you an evolving human animal. And I would encourage you to give yourself as much compassion as you do to other creatures on this planet. I always go back to your pet, like your cat or your dog. If they needed meat to survive and thrive, you would give it to them because it works. And you have to enlarge that circle of compassion to yourself and to other humans, that we're all different. And when you look at how life works on this planet, and this is coming from my childhood days of growing up on this small old organic farm, that the earth that grows our green vegetables needs to be fed with minerals. It needs to be fed with dead and dying matter. And all vegetables eat animals. That's how the life cycle works on this planet. And Michael Pollan has this great saying, you are what you eat, ate. So, here in Brooklyn, New York City, where I live, there's a rooftop farm that's very cool. And how they grow earth on the top of a building They have to amend the soil. They have to bring dirt up. Well, you can't just bring dirt up and grow food in it. You have to put stuff in the dirt to make it rich and make sure that the acidity is balanced. And you have to put in stuff like bone meal or fish meal. Earth is made up of dead animals. That's how the life cycle works. And your broccoli may very well have eaten cow bones. So just take a broader look at the way life on Earth works, that it's a cycle, and that you are not bad for being a part of that cycle. You are still a good being just by being a human.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that impacted me during my very short, brief stint experimenting with vegan diet, one of the things that really had struck me was the environmental impact argument. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, like learning those things did change the way that I eat, permanently. So I never really went back to typical the chicken with the antibiotics raised in confinement and the meat and that type of thing. Like, it actually changed the way I ate, and now I really try my best to source meat from local farmers and that is raised in more sustainable type of way. But what are your thoughts and experiences based on that whole idea that, eating meat is basically causing global warming and destroying the planet?
Well, there are a lot of things that are causing global warming, and you can have an impact by purchasing the best quality, the best raised animal protein. You can absolutely do that. And I've read a lot about this. There's some amazing TED Talks that really show the important contribution that large grazing herds of mammal have on the welfare of our ecosystem. So there's something called desertification, which is a rampant problem here in the United States. I don't know if it's affecting Canada as much, but it's definitely happening across Africa and Australia. Desertification means that good quality land, arable land where you can grow food, humans are not very good at taking care of the planet, let's be honest. And we are turning arable land into desert. And one of the ways that's happening is we're over farming, and we have removed the natural process of large grazing herds of animals. So here in the United States, we used to have huge herds of buffalo, we used to have elk, deer. And what happens when these ginormous, hundreds of thousands of animals and herds roaming across the plains and the prairies and the arable land is they would churn up the soil with their hooves, poop on it, and that would fertilize the soil, and then they'd move on. So it was this beautiful cycle. And that's not happening anymore because we've compressed all of the herds of animals into feedlots. Mm-hmm. So that means that a lot of the good earth out there that was here, that, the original farmers that came and quote unquote discovered America.
I love that.
Anyway, it's now becoming either over farmed, so they need to put in more fertilizer from more animals, or it's becoming desert because you need that constant input of manure and churning up the soil to keep it healthy and arable. So there's a lot about soil that people don't know. Mm-hmm. I know a little bit because I grew up on a farm. I don't know everything. Yeah. But I know a bit about what it takes. And you cannot feed the amount of people on this planet with the current systems that we have. There's actually more than enough food produced on this planet. It's a matter of getting it to the people. We waste, a quarter of the food that's grown, just leaving it in the fields. So we actually have a very inefficient food system. And we're not taking care of it properly because people don't understand. And, I encourage you to go buy the ugly fruits and vegetables. If we bought more ugly imperfect fruits and vegetables from our farmers market, that would encourage farmers to pick more of the ugly fruits and vegetables and not leave it in the fields, not waste so much of the food. That's another part of this issue. So it's very complex. It's very complex. People want to bring it down to, oh, well, if I just stop eating meat, I'm saving the planet. Well, no, not really. There's a lot of other issues at hand here.
Well, based on your experiences, I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about that whole idea of all or nothing thinking. I think that is what really strikes me and fascinates me about a diet like a vegan diet, being that I did try it as well, and being that the arguments are very convincing to the point that you ignore what's happening in your body because you believe it's something so strongly that you don't really, like, you get to the point that you're not really paying attention to what's happening with you because you just have this belief it's all or nothing. If I eat any meat, I'm going to get cancer and die, and I'm going to destroy the planet. Not to mention the fact that I'm a murderer. Like, there's no middle ground there.
Right. Yeah. So all or nothing thinking is also called black and white thinking. It's also called extreme thinking. If you ever find yourself using the words like always or never or everyone or no one or failure, if you find yourself using those words or hearing them in your head, that's extreme or all or nothing thinking, where you're either all good or all bad. And this isn't just when it comes to food or diet or veganism. It's so common. It's really rampant. And, think about the day you had yesterday or today. And if you really look at everything that happened over the course of the day, probably a good dozen good things happened that you actually contributed to making those things happen. But then there was one thing that went badly. What's the one thing that you think about at night?
Of course, it's that one thing.
It's the one thing. We're trained. There's something called negativity bias, and it's built into humans. It's an evolutionary tool that keeps us alive in some ways. Negativity bias is you look for what's wrong so that you don't die. Right? It's a really handy tool to keep us from falling off of bridges or, eating glass. I mean, you look for what's wrong so that you don't die. And it's not serving us in the end. Look at what's right with you. This is the alternative. Build on your strengths. I got really inspired in the last couple of years. My son has dyslexia, and I noticed that at a young age, at the age of 5, he was starting to think that he was stupid. And it was heartbreaking because he's such a bright, warm, kind kid. And he was only focusing on the fact that handwriting was really hard for him. So he thought he was stupid. So I got really passionate about positive psychology. I just finished my certification this year. And through the program, I learned about mindset and the tools and how the brain works and how we're built. And I realized that this all or nothing thinking is everywhere. It's in how we think about how we look. It's in our relationships. It's in our work. It's in how we feed ourselves or don't feed ourselves, physically and metaphorically. So look for what's going well. Build on your strengths, not your weaknesses. Look at what's right with you.
Well, and I want to get into, we've talked about it a bit, and I wanted to get into a little bit more of what our cravings are actually telling us, how to tune in to our bodies. Because one of the things that I've talked about a lot on the show is that a lot of us are disconnected from what's happening with our bodies, to the point that you could have, I mentioned this on one of my previous podcasts, but you could be on any particular diet and be thinking to yourself, I feel great because you've been on that particular diet for years, or you've had a certain lifestyle for years. So maybe you don't get a lot of sleep and you drink coffee every day, but you don't really realize how crappy you feel because you've never really felt good.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this whole thing where then you find something or whatever, or you sleep every day for a week or whatever. And then it's only then that you realize how crappy you've been feeling for the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. I've definitely had that experience a couple times in my life. I mean, when I finally got my iron levels back up, I was like, oh my gosh, I have energy. Look at me. I can get through the whole day without coffee. Woohoo!
La!
It was incredible, but you don't know what you don't know until you know it, right? I mean, there's a lot of benefit in looking for outside support. There's a lot of, I encourage you to find the doctor or the coach or the website that's going to help you. But there's also your body to listen to. What's your body telling you you need more of? And don't just try to mask it with sugar or caffeine or shopping or TV or social media. Really, it's time to pay attention. It's really time to listen.
Well, and you had mentioned that you were like a sugar fiend, and I think it's the funniest, and just that you actually went to church specifically for the sugar. But I am not judging you because I was also a sugar fiend when I was a kid. I mean, the guilty confessions of a kid. When I was little, I can remember, you remember a long time ago when people used to eat cornflakes for breakfast? I'm sure they still do, but my parents had this sugar container that had a little hole in the top. And, you just pour the sugar onto your cornflakes or whatever.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I would sit behind the couch and fill my mouth with sugar, like tip it over
Yeah.
like a drink,
Yeah.
fill my mouth, wait till it melts. It's disgusting. Hey, like this is
My
nasty,
my teeth hurt just thinking about it.
right? But I mean, I was little. It's not like I was doing this when I was 16, but I technically was because of all the gummy candy I was eating. But anyways, so I would do this, and it was this thing that would just continue. And even now, I've been modifying my diet and through the years, and it's a lot less. Like I eat 10 times less sugar than I used to. But I can totally relate to that. And I think a lot of the listeners can relate to that sweet tooth thing where you're just craving sugar a
Yeah.
lot.
Hmm.
So, what did you find actually helped to address that? I know you mentioned that you had candida overgrowth. I mean, how did you even
Hmm.
figure that out?
So here's where I go into cravings. This is what can really help you begin to understand what your cravings mean. So the first root cause, there's four root causes of cravings. The first is bacterial. Then there's nutritional, emotional, and physical. So the bacterial root cause of cravings is something that everyone needs to start with. Take a look at it. You are 10 times more bacterial than you are human. There's 10 times more bacterial and yeast cells in your body than there are human cells because they're tiny and we need a lot of them. The estimates are like there's like, what, 5 to 12 pounds of bacteria in your body.
Some people liken it to an organ. They say that we should consider it an
Yeah.
organ.
Absolutely. And your gut, your microbiome, your digestive system is your second brain. It's your emotional brain, and it's where most of your bacteria reside. And we have this beautiful symbiotic relationship with them. We need them to digest and absorb our food. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't be alive. And when there is an imbalance, there's so many different kinds of bacteria. The most common that women have heard of is candida yeast. So candida in itself isn't bad, but it can transform into a fungus. And that fungus can become a menace. And if we take a lot of antibiotics over the course of our life, if we're very stressed, if we eat a highly refined diet, that bacteria can overgrow, that fungus, that yeast can overgrow. And those suckers crave sugar. They live on sugar, they feed on it, and they communicate with us via the vagus nerve, which is kind of in the front of the body, and it's what you calm. It's what you calm down when you lay on your stomach, which is why some people love to fall asleep on their stomachs because it calms your body down. Um, it communicates with us. Feed me sugar. So it's literally the thing getting you off the couch at 10 o'clock at night to go to the freezer and get the ice cream. And if you've ever tried to go off sugar and you feel like terrible, you go through this detox where you're like, oh, headaches and sick and ugh, I feel awful. That's because part of you is dying. The bacteria are dying off if you're not giving them sugar. So it will, for some people, it will feel bad before it feels better. I certainly went through that, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it because you have to feed the good guys and kill off most of the bad guys, get that balance back. And that requires, for most people dealing with the candida yeast bacteria, and this is like you are the serious sugar cravers. You cannot imagine going that long without it, and you feel foggy and fuzzy, and you have skin trouble and weight trouble and hormone trouble and all this. That's a yeast or a bacterial imbalance. So you have to go off of sugar, and that means alcohol as well and refined carbohydrates. And for some people, even vinegars. And you need to grow and make a happy environment for the positive, the healthier bacteria that you need more of. And that requires lots of veggies, lots of fiber, and lots of greens. Super greens are good, so taking things like spirulina, and then start adding in small amounts of the probiotic rich foods like raw sauerkraut and kimchi. One 16-ounce jar of kimchi can contain up to like 8 bottles worth of probiotics. So you're getting a lot more bang for your buck by eating raw fermented foods.
I think the power of the bacteria in your gut, the power of the healthy bacteria it can't be understated. And when you were talking about the candida, other than the fact that I actually had a physical reaction, I was shuddering at the thought of having fungus in my body. Um, Other than that, it really made me think about yeast infections and how if you watch a lot of TV or whatever, there's always a commercial for Canestin or whatever. And it kind of promotes this idea that it's normal and, for women to have yeast infections here and there, like every now and then or every month or whatever. And obviously, a lot of women get yeast infections kind of on a regular basis. And that is one of the things. It's not very scientific because it's just me. But I know that when I started incorporating probiotics and different things, I can't remember the last time I've had one of those. But
Mm-hmm.
before I knew anything about diet and all those types of things, I'd have the occasional one, right?
Yeah.
And some women have them to the point that it's kind of recurring, right? It's always kind of on the verge, and then you have one, and that is an indication if your gut flora is actually balanced, that's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So, that's the place to start with your cravings to begin to understand what they mean. And the next root cause of cravings is nutritional. I really believe that I wasn't getting the nutrients that I needed from my vegan diet. Again, one of them was iron, but one of the common nutrient deficiencies that most Western women experience is magnesium deficiency. And it's just so convenient that chocolate happens to be a great hit of magnesium for us. It also provides little caffeine, sugar, and wonderful mouthfeel. So, so our bodies are in their brilliance know that when you have a magnesium deficiency, your body will ask for more chocolate. So look at your magnesium levels. I always encourage people to go and get a blood test. Like really find out what are your hormone levels doing. What do you need? What are your nutrient levels at? Find out the basics. At least get a baseline so that if things do, because things will change. Things will definitely change. And you want to have an understanding of what's true for your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I actually have a great, really easy chart that people can look at to help them begin to understand their cravings. If you want to share it with people, I can give it to you, or you can put it in the show notes, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll link to it in the show notes so the listeners don't have to worry about jotting it down right now.
Perfect.
And then you mentioned there's the bacterial, the nutritional deficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
And then physical and emotional.
Emotional cravings and physical cravings. So with emotions, we are emotional creatures. I have women say to me all the time, I'm an emotional eater. And I say, sweetheart, welcome to the human race. We are all emotional eaters. Even the big, huge, muscly guy at the gym doing CrossFit, drinking muscle milk after his workout, he has there is emotion that goes into that decision. He wants to be big and bulky and muscly. There's emotion there. There's emotion behind the marathon runner who chooses their food. We're all emotional eaters. We women are really hard on ourselves, and we think because we have quote unquote bad emotions or too much emotion that somehow our emotional life is somehow more messed up than other people's. Well, it's not. Your body is actually doing its best to try and calm you, help you feel a little bit better, soothe you in some way. And, in the scheme of things, eating isn't the worst coping mechanism. It's really not. You could be doing a lot worse. But let's look at what you're not looking at. What's going on in your life that you feel unsteady, uneasy, stressed? What's going on? What support do you need? What do you need to voice? What do you need to strategize and work through? What resources do you need to help you manage life better? So that the emotions that show up in your body, which is again very human, your body feels emotions. You feel stress and anger and loneliness and frustration, and your body knows if I eat some potato chips, I can deal with the anger and resentment that I'm feeling at work. And it's true, it helps. But as a long-term strategy, potato chips are not the answer. So yeah, we're emotional eaters. And then there's the physical cravings. We're all physical beings having, in this spiritual experience that we're having. And you are built for pleasure. You were built to experience pleasure. You have pleasure buttons literally built into you. The clitoris is like the most amazing part of the human body. And we don't, we have so much shame, misunderstanding about physical pleasure. So that's one of the reasons why we gravitate to foods, because sex is so dangerous for us. Sex feels dangerous because we want to be good. We don't want to be shamed. We don't want to be slutty. So sex feels dangerous. And also because so many women have been sexually abused or traumatized, sex feels dangerous. So food becomes our safe sex. Food becomes our only safe source of physical pleasure when sex is dangerous and a no-go zone. So look at how much physical pleasure you have in your life. And that could be starting, an intimate solo masturbation practice where you begin to learn your body in a new way, just for yourself, for your own physical self. And I really wish that we taught younger girls that masturbation is okay, that it's healthy, that it's normal, because it is. Everybody touches themselves at some point, and it's not bad or wrong. In fact, I think the best way for young girls to learn their own bodies and their own boundaries so that they know what feels good to them. There was a study out of the UK in the last year that showed that teenage girls, 15, 16-year-olds who are having sex, most of them are having painful sex because they don't know that they're supposed to enjoy it. They don't know that it's supposed to feel good to the female as well. And they don't know about lube. So they're having painful sex. They don't know what their body's capable of or what to ask for or how to say no or yes or faster or stop. So we need to learn our own bodies before we can begin to express what our bodies need. And that goes into food, it goes into sex and relationships, it goes into all of our lives. So this cravings idea goes really far into all aspects of our female experience.
I love that you say that. I've thought about that whole concept of, because I've known women personally who were having sex for years before they had orgasms. And what I always say about that is you'd be hard pressed to find a man who's never had an orgasm or who
Right.
would think that it's okay to have sex without orgasming.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that it's highly problematic in a way, if as a woman, if you've never experienced the pleasure of orgasm, and then you find yourself in a relationship with someone and that's the first time that you experience that type of pleasure. And I think the reason that I think that can be problematic is for a very practical reason. What if he's jerk?
Yeah.
And he's giving you this pleasure, so then you've never experienced that before, or maybe with anybody else, and so then I feel like that's a recipe to become kind of dependent, thinking that you need to have that person in your life to experience that pleasure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have a lot to say
Absolutely.
about that.
No, it's beautiful. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you're bringing that up, um, because it's so interesting how we are often attracted to guys who have, and I'm being so generalized here, but let's say attracted to people that we have an immediate physical or chemistry rush with, but they may not be the best partner or the best caretaker or the best, long term person for our lives. And, sometimes you have to learn that for yourself. I certainly did a couple of times. Um, but when you can get really comfortable and clear with what feels good to you, not just sexually, but in your life, what are your boundaries? How do you want to be treated? What will you accept? What kind of treatment is appropriate of you? And this goes down to the basic core of our self-worth and how we see ourselves in the world.
Well, I have a few final questions to end the show, and before I ask them, there was one other thing that I wanted to ask, and of course, it came up because of what we're talking about now. But when I was researching for the podcast and preparing for our interview, one of the things that you had just talked about was the impact that your diet actually had on your not only your menstrual cycle but also your libido.
Mm.
So maybe you could just touch on that a little bit, and then we'll get into the final questions.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to call my most recent book that where I really go into all of this is called Women, Food, and Desire. And I wanted to call the book Men and Meatballs because when I finally got my hormones back on track, when I had started eating meat again, I started craving sex again. My libido came back online and it had been dead for a couple of years. And that's not normal for a woman in her early 30s, right? You should have some libido, and I had none. Now, factor into that the nutrient deficiencies and the fact that my marriage was falling apart. But when I started eating meat again and my nutrition was answered, my nutritional needs were answered, I looked around. I was like, "Oh, I'm not dead. I could date. Like, okay, I'm getting divorced, but why not? Like, I, I want this. I used to like sex. Maybe I should try to have some again." And it was such an enlivening experience to have the desire for sex again, and to, there's the whole emotional component. Feeling confident enough to go date and have sex with new people. That's challenging emotionally, but if you can get into it, it can be really fun. I highly encourage you to try it. So yeah, my hormones and my nutrition and my life satisfaction were all very much linked together.
Yeah. Well, and of course, your hormones are linked to your libido, and that's linked to your fertility, and none of these things happen in isolation. So I think that's really an interesting kind of outcome that you probably didn't expect when you
Right.
started incorporating those animal proteins into your diet again. So to end the show, just a few final questions that I tend to ask. What would you say is the biggest myth about veganism or vegetarianism, I guess you could say, that you would like to see corrected?
I think the biggest myth is it's the perfect diet for everyone and the planet. I don't think it's the perfect diet for everyone. It's not. If it was, it would have worked for a lot more of us.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is the biggest myth about fertility that you'd like to see corrected?
Hmm. The biggest myth about fertility, I guess I think it's the same thing with quote unquote succeeding at veganism in that, if it doesn't work for you or if it's challenging, it doesn't mean anything about you or your worth as a woman or as a person. And that can be challenging to come to terms with. But if you're having struggles with your body in any way, it doesn't mean that you are bad or wrong.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a beautiful note to end on because, of course, it's the fertility and the ability to have children is so linked to that value you feel as a woman or your identity. And if that's challenged in any way, it's just such a hard emotional thing for women. You feel like you're failing.
Yeah.
And failure, that was one of the things that you talked about with all or nothing thinking. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, Alex, thank you so much for being here today. I had an amazing time talking to you, and I really am excited to share our interview with the listeners because I just feel that there's so much valuable information that they will get from this interview today. And so your most recent book, Women, Food, and Desire, I'll link to that in the podcast show notes. And maybe you could just tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you, find out more about you, or work with you if they were inspired by our interview today.
Absolutely. So I would say go to cravingscleanse.com. That's my site and my program where I help women get a handle on and manage those 4 root causes of craving. So cravingscleanse.com.
Okay, and then we'll be in touch so that I can link the chart that you were talking about to the show notes page.
Great.
And so thanks again. It was so much fun talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so just head over to the show notes page and let me know what you found most helpful or most inspiring from today's show. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/59, so that's the number 59. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S, on Twitter at Fertile Friday. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, come over and join the community on Facebook. So just head over to fertilityfriday.com/community and you'll be redirected to the Fertility Friday Fertility Awareness Facebook group. Also, if you've been enjoying the podcast, please look for it on iTunes and subscribe and leave a 5-star review so that more people can find it. Of course, leave an honest review. I do appreciate you taking the time to let me know how I'm doing, and I do read every single review. Also, if you have an idea for a podcast episode or a guest suggestion, just shoot me an email at info@fertilityfriday.com. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast. So no matter what you're doing, thank you for letting me be part of your day. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.